We've all heard the phrase, it takes a village to raise a child, but the thing that we often forget is that it also takes one to support the mother.
Well, speaking of the village, this is our podcast. I'm Nicole Harlow.
And I'm Dawn Thompson, and we're here to connect you with a village of support you need from pregnancy to parenting.
So come on this journey with us as we build your village one episode at a time. All right. Good day, good day. My name is Nicole Harlow. I'm joined here by my lovely co-host, who I'm a little bit jealous of today because she is in Hawaii, Dawn Thompson, and our lovely guest, Gily Roselle. I'm going to toss it over to Gily so she can introduce herself to you, and we're going to talk about shame in motherhood, and a really hot topic, I think, in so many ways. So, Gily, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here with the both of you. My name is Gily Roselle. I'm a perinatal mental health therapist. I'm an LMFT, a licensed marriage and family therapist in the state of Connecticut. I work primarily with moms who are having a hard time with the transition into motherhood, or needing support navigating the ups and downs of motherhood and postpartum moms. I've been in the field for, I want to say, about a decade. I didn't go into private practice until 2017. I started focusing more on postpartum and perinatal mental health 4 years ago, after I became a mom for the first time and experienced my own unique experience with postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety. I felt like, oh my God, there's no way moms need to suffer in silence. Like, I was just really flabbergasted at the fact that I didn't know what was going on with me, and struggling alone. So I felt I had to really educate myself and learn more about postpartum and learn more about not only what was going on for me, but I'm a therapist. Like, I need to learn this so I can support more moms who are going through something similar.
Let me just say something, because yesterday someone sent a new article to me about the issues with maternal mortality in the United States. And I've probably heard this statistic many times, but I'm a visual person, and this report put it in a visual graph. I did not realize that when we look at maternal mortality in the United States, the largest portion of maternal deaths is actually postpartum. 30% of all of the women who die after having a baby, it's after postpartum, which is what they're showing is directly related to mental health issues. That's astounding to me. And I want people to hear that. So the United States has one of the worst maternal health outcomes in the developed world. We have the worst, and the only developed country with a rising maternal mortality rate. Hard stop. And 30% of those, which is the highest of all of the different categories, is mental health, which means women are harming themselves in the first year after they give birth.
That statistic in itself is not only mind-blowing, but I have goosebumps, right, thinking about that number. And so when I think about, I also suffered for 8 months in silence because I had so much shame in how I felt, which is, we're going to go into that today, right? Because I think shame off the bat is what I see a lot, one of the inhibitors of women being able to speak out and to say, like, hey, something's wrong. It took me 8 months to realize I'm not getting any better. This is not okay. I need help, right? And so I did, and I felt like myself again, right? And then I went on to have a second child, and I freaked out again because I thought, I can't go through that again. I can't. And so that's when I did a lot of the research, and I learned about Postpartum Support International, did the trainings, learned about it, and started working with moms. And what I'm seeing is that there are many similar experiences within motherhood not only the clinical aspect of it, right? The postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, but this feeling of so much shame that is carried in motherhood for many, many different reasons, but how it really impacts not only their identity, trying to navigate this role of being a mom and what it means to them, but it also impacts their relationship with their child, right?
Yeah.
That dynamic within itself.
So I think a really interesting fun fact that I want to put into this episode for sure, coming from a energetic standpoint and an embodiment like of your body, we carry shame in our womb space. We carry shame in our sacral chakra. We carry shame, fear, guilt, all of that right where that baby comes from. So super interesting when we're talking about this topic, just to know that like it impacts you, not just on a mental level, not just on a physical level, but on an energetic level as well.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing that I want to point out here, because, you know, our podcast is all about the village, right? It's speaking of the village. And I think, you know, the way that Nicole and I came together in this thought process was that this is the biggest issue that women face, is the fact that we were never, ever meant to go home with our newborns by ourselves with our equally unprepared, ill-informed partner and say, good luck.
Yeah.
And what I think is very interesting in that article yesterday, where we'll put the article in the show notes because it was very fascinating. The other thing I found was interesting was when Black women or women of color are more likely to die, right? But when it came to mental health, those 30%, it was mostly Caucasian women. It was mostly white women that were harming themselves. And the theory, and I'm not sure if that was in the article or in a subsequent thing that I read, but it was essentially saying because the Black community, the Hispanic community, the Asian community, they still rely on the village so much more than Caucasian folks, right? Like they still have a lot of family dynamics. They feed each other. There really is a different dynamic still in that community versus the average, you know, white family.
So my brain is going in all different directions because I have so many things to say, but just to kind of piggyback on what you're talking about, because you're bringing up race and culture too. And so I'm Latina. So I had my son 4 years ago. What happened 4 years ago is the heart of COVID, right? The world was already an awful, scary place. Now I'm having this baby. I have no idea what I'm doing. Everything's shut down. One of the vulnerability factors that led me to have postpartum depression and anxiety was I couldn't breastfeed. So there was a lot of shame with that, that, you know, coming from a Latina family, a Latina background, that's what you did, right? Like you're a woman, you're going to figure this out, you know what to do. And because I wasn't able to do that because my baby wasn't able to latch, there was so much shame of like, if I can't do this, then what does that mean for my motherhood journey, right? Like I can't even do this one simple thing. And we know it's not so simple, right? And in that culture, right, there's this expectation of these are the things you do. And if you are struggling, you don't talk about that, right? I remember my mom telling me one day, and I don't hold it against her, but I still remember this day vividly. I was having such a hard time with my son. He had acid reflux, another, you know, vulnerability factor for me to, you know, to struggle. And I remember her telling me, well, you're a mom now. You have to figure it out. And I remember thinking to myself, what? Like, I can't. I don't know what I'm doing. I have this baby who doesn't stop crying. I'm not sleeping. I'm not figuring this out. I'm not meant to do this, right? That's what I was left to. The shame led me to believe I'm not meant to do this, right? So when we talk about shame in itself, and I always mention Brene Brown, right? Because she is the, you know, shame expert, right? I love her. I love her work. And I believe in her work, right? Everything she says is spot on. So the things that we know about shame, right? is that it makes you want to hide. Brene Brown tells it all the time. It makes you want to hide. It doesn't want you to be seen. So what happens to moms when they're consumed by shame? It really inhibits them from not only realizing that something's going on, but it really isolates them from help and support, right? And so when I see this with moms, you know, that's kind of where I start to head into our work. It's like, we need to work through this shame, because if we can't tackle this, our work is going to be even more difficult, right? We really have to work through this. And so the metaphor I use a lot.
And it'll take longer for you to figure it out. Right? Which then
Absolutely.
just everything. And then, you know, and then we have the Instagram effect. Right? Look at all of us. Oh,
lovely Instagram, the reels, right? Yes.
All these moms showing the perfection of like, just had my little baby. And, you know what I mean? And it's just, I'm so grateful that there are some people who are starting to share the reality of how hard it is. But I think that for a very long time, people have underestimated just how hard the postpartum period is. It is beyond anything, in my opinion, that you can prepare yourself for. It's kind of like when, you know, all the adults say, you know, when you're a kid, like, you know, I'm trying to think of something that they just say, now listen, you know, this is really hard. This is really hard. And as teenagers or as young 20-somethings, you're just like, yeah, cool. Got it. And then you get there and you're like, oh, fuck. No, oh, sorry, baby.
You're fine.
Right. Like, but I use that word because it's that traumatic, and people do not get it. And then you put shame on top of all of this, which is, and like what you were saying, you know, if you are in a specific demographic, it's even greater. That shame gets even bigger and more difficult to manage. And I guess the thing I want people to understand before we even, you know, really, I mean, we've got a lot of show left still, but I want people to understand right now that if you are pregnant, if you have any moment where you start to feel shame and you want to go in, do the absolute opposite, even though everything in your body is telling you to do. Go in. Do absolutely the opposite. You will be better for yourself and better for your baby.
Well, Gily left us on a cliffhanger there, so I really want to know this metaphor she was about to say. But
I'm so sorry.
It's okay. It's suspenseful.
I'm so excited about this subject. I'm sorry. I'm so excited about it.
No, don't apologize. This is amazing.
I just wanted the metaphor because I was like thinking of.
Yeah, it's so big, and I just want people, like, I know how often people drop off in a podcast and don't listen to the whole thing. So I just
absolutely
moved to be like, listen, right now, I want you to hear this part right here. So okay,
absolutely,
it's so important.
So I'm, you know, also for the readers, I'm gonna read what shame actually means, and then we're gonna go into my metaphor.
Okay.
So shame, a painful feeling of humiliation or distress caused by the consciousness of wrong or foolish behavior. Okay. So it's this deep, deep rooting feeling that essentially what I see, it takes over your identity, right? So the metaphor that I use with moms to really fully understand shame is Venom and Spider-Man, right? So Venom, yeah, right? We're a big Spider-Man family in my household, but Venom takes over Spider-Man, right? What happens to him? He now becomes a villain, right? And that's not who Spider-Man is. He's a superhero, right? He's great. Venom takes over. Shame is this black, icky, gooey stuff that takes over, and it really distorts how you see yourself. Okay? It distorts how you see the world. It can distort how you relate to your own child. Right? So when we think about that, what does that mean? Again, coming from a Latino background, there's a lot of shame around if your child does not behave accordingly, you're not doing something right. Okay. If your child is acting out in public or, not sitting properly at the restaurant table, what are you doing? How come you're not correcting that behavior, right? There's so much shame of, I am solely responsible for how my child behaves. And we know that is not true. Your child is their own person with their own feelings, their own behaviors, their own world of seeing things. So shame can take over in many, many different ways, right? And so, another level of shame in motherhood is body shaming, the expectation of bouncing back up, right? Have children, but just don't look like you have them, right?
Yeah.
That implicit message, it's so deep. It's so deep. And I see it so much. And so one of the things I always say this to clients, shame in motherhood is almost like the rite of passage of becoming a mom, because it comes with the territory, right? And we know shame can come from many different places. And I believe shame is there even before becoming a mother, and it just amplifies because the nature of becoming a mom, right? And we know shame comes from trauma too.
I was going to say, I think just women inherently, like generationally, we carry shame and, the good girl conditioning and, there's so many layers of it. I mean, we could probably do like a 10-hour episode on
Absolutely.
But also, like, I just want to backtrack a little bit, talking about the postpartum period versus birth, right? Like, in this podcast, we talk a lot about birth support and preparing for birth and making sure you're informed and supported. And even backtracking more so, right? Like, we focus so much, we plan so much for our wedding day, right? One day, wedding day, our birth. Okay, maybe it could be a couple of days of labor and things like that, but essentially one day for your birth. And then postpartum is literally forever after you have the baby. In postpartum forever. But let's just say, clinically 1 year, right? After every baby, but realistically forever. So we plan so much for our wedding day. We hopefully are informed and supported and plan for our birth and how we want our birth. And then this long period of postpartum that includes so much of ourselves and the baby and all different phases and all the things, we just say we're going to wing it. Like, it doesn't make sense, right? Like, we really, really need a postpartum plan. We need that support structure. We need to know our, I think about, like, my kids are in, younger grades, right? They're doing fire drills and, mapping out when something happens, this is what you do, right? Like, why don't we do that for postpartum? When we can't breastfeed, what do? We call a lactation consultant. We talk to an oral specialist. When our kid has colic, where do we go, right? Like, what are the options? Like, how can we navigate all of these things and not doing it while we're recovering physically, mentally, emotionally, hormonally swinging from one side to the other side, while we're bleeding, while we're, in this vulnerable state? Why not do that beforehand? And it usually takes, I can tell, from all of us, right? Like, Dawn, I know your story is essentially at this point, and Gily, you just shared, like, it doesn't hit us until we go through it.
Yeah.
Like, that happened. I don't want to say luckily, but I'll say luckily with my first, I had terrible postpartum anxiety and OCD. If you guys are listening, there's a couple episodes where I mentioned some of my story. I'm not going to go too far into it, but it happened with my first. Thankfully, it happened so hard that I kind of did the same thing, Gily. Like, I went into Postpartum Support International. I got educated. I wanted to share and help other women, but also my future self, because postpartum number 2, which was also during COVID, about 2 weeks after lockdowns, postpartum number 3 and 4 were all very different, because it was always, well, I don't want that to happen again. So I'm going to make sure I'm prepared and supported and make everything I can, prevent that from happening again.
You know what breaks my heart, though? Most people don't do that because they think it's normal.
Well,
They think it's just like when, it's just like when people have these horrendous births and they just go, oh, well, that's just how birth is. That's just how postpartum is. Everyone said it would be the hardest thing I ever did. Everyone said, you know, and so they don't do that. They just go, oh, well, this is normal because that's what I was told it would be.
Right.
Right. And most people don't do that. They just go, you know, I think about birth and how many people ended up in cesareans because they had induction of labor that turned into the snowball effect and and then they go, oh, hell no, I'm not going through that again. I'm just signing up for a C-section. Right? Not realizing that their birth could have been very, very different if they'd had the right support and the right tools and allowed normal physiological process to happen if possible. I mean, it's the same kind of thing. And I think it's so sad that how many people just think it's normal.
It's extremely sad. And it's also even more tragic in a sense that some women have to go through all this trauma and postpartum and to realize, like, I need help, right? To Nicole's point, right? How can we have systems in place to provide moms before they have their child to be prepared, to know all the ins and outs, right? Who are those providers that they have the most access to during this period to be able to facilitate that? You know, it makes me think of, you know, something you mentioned earlier, Nicole, right? That it even starts in the womb. I have 2 children, and my birth with each of them were day and night. I mean, their personality is day and night. I had postpartum depression, anxiety with my first, happy as a clam with my second. I was not able to breastfeed with my first. I was able to breastfeed with my second. Just everything was just night and day. And I'm truly convinced it had all to do with not only how my children came into this world, but where I was emotionally. With my son, I needed an assisted vacuum. It was a really horrific birth, and I didn't realize how horrific until like I processed it on my own and said, oh my God, that was actually really awful. And then when I think about my daughter's birth, completely different. I was so relaxed that I was crowning, and nobody knew I was crowning until the doctor came in and said, well, we got a baby, right? That's how relaxed I was. I remember the nurse saying, that must have been a really good epidural. Because I remember just laughing because I was so happy that it was so different with her. And now reflecting back, I had a small little village with me in the hospital room with my daughter. I remember having this whole team of nurses just making me move and do all these moves to help me dilate because I wasn't able to dilate. Whereas with my son, I didn't have that. I had one nurse, right? Because COVID. Thankfully, I wasn't in a place where we needed to wear masks yet. That came after, but I had one nurse who really was not. She was helpful, right? In the moment, I thought anything would be helpful. I didn't have anything to compare it to, but I just had one person trying to help me, and it just wasn't working, right? Whereas with my second, I had a whole team of nurses, and I'm truly convinced that is why I had such a different experience with birth and postpartum. My postpartum health with my second was great.
And we've learned that too on other episodes, just about, again, how not the experience of your birth, right? Whether it is traumatic or not, but if you had a safe space to process that. Are you laughing at Jenna? Can you hear her?
Yes, snoring.
I just texted John to come get her. For our listeners who are not watching this video, my 2-year-old is like literally cozy up in me and just passed out, and she's snoring so loud.
Right? So she's got.
This is mom. This is motherhood, right? Like
no shame. Podcast or not, kids are just their moments. But yeah, I could totally
before we were starting to record, so I had to, mush her up.
So fine. It's so fine. It's just cute. I can hear her snoring.
It is cute.
But anyways, I think that the conversation that we're having right now, you guys, is you know, people really come into this. A lot of people, there's some people who have just as smooth as pie. Everything's smooth as pie. The first birth's easy. Postpartum's easy, like whatever. That is few and far between. It's few and far between, and especially with this baby. And like, I love that you're sharing that story though, Gily, because I think that people just underestimate that whole village piece. And it's like, I feel like I can't emphasize it enough. Like, get support, and good, healthy support though too, right? Because listen, I've seen plenty of moms in the labor and delivery room, and it is not good. It's not, you know, so you have to have the right support too.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But just getting back to the shame piece, your birth really has a significant impact on your postpartum. And how you feel about your birth, how your birth went is oftentimes the first step to the shame game. Right? Your birth didn't go the way you thought. You had all these visions of how great you were going to do with it, how well you exercised, how well you practiced, however, the childbirth education class that you take. I remember specifically when I gave birth to my first child in the OR, through an incision in my belly, one of the first things that I said to my husband, my ex-husband, is, well, that childbirth education class was a total waste of time. Right? That shame was already spinning while I was on the OR table.
I also just want to make a point that, like, I see this so often in like Facebook groups and things, and it breaks my heart because it's like, and you know, I've just heard stories, but like, oh, my body wasn't blank enough, so I had to do this, right? Like, or like the system, I'm not going to blame the doctors, but the system makes it so that the woman failed in some way, which is typically not the case. I don't want to say typically not, like probably 95% of the time not the case. It's the interventions that the medical system impose on the woman's body that's going against nature that then creates the quote unquote failed outcome, right? If a cesarean is the failed outcome. Now, they will never admit that. They will never say that. They're saying, oh, your body wasn't dilating fast enough, or your, you know, shoulder dystocia isn't because you were on your back and you shouldn't be on your back. It's because your pelvis is too small, or, you know, again, fill in the blank. Yeah, the baby is too big.
100%.
Fill in the blank, but that is imposed shame. It's not even our story, right? Like, it's not even how we process what happened. It's someone telling us, that society telling us, right, that you didn't do
gaslighting.
Yes.
Yes.
That's exactly what it is.
At its best.
Yes.
I can tell you, this is getting me all fired up. Because the doctor that I had for my first kid sat on the edge of my bed and he said, "You're so lucky you were here, because back in the day, you would have been one of those women who died in childbirth." He said that to me. And,
oh my God.
And I was like, you know, like, what does that even mean? Right? What does that even mean? And the reality is I got to the hospital too early. I wasn't actually in labor. I mean, I was in very early labor. They should have sent me home. I was nowhere near active labor. They gave me an epidural very early. They broke my water prematurely because they were trying to get things going. My daughter went into distress, and they had to do a C-section, or not had to, but they chose to. And when I looked back, I went, you know, after years of being a birth professional, I went back and I pulled my records because there's a lot that you learn. You don't, by the way, people pisses me off. People say, well, are you a nurse? You don't know. Oh, you know what? You don't have to be a nurse. You don't have to go to school to see what's happening. Learn.
Absolutely.
Hands-on experience, folks. But anyway, but that's, I went and looked at my strip because my strip was in my file of the baby that they said was in distress. My baby was not in distress. It had a couple of D cells, but these D cells were because of the Pitocin that they had me on at the highest level possible. My baby was in distress because they did pit to distress. That is a common practice, pit to distress, so that they can do a C-section. And that happened to me. But do you know what? I went around and I told that story so many times of like, oh, I had to have a C-section because I almost died in childbirth. I loved the drama of it. Because,
and it's my baby would have died. I would have died.
Yes, because I released some of the shame somehow by saying, oh, it was necessary. And that for a long time.
I think shame also like thrives in silence, like we talked about in the beginning, right? It thrives in silence. So as you were talking, it was almost like cathartic, like, oh, I don't have to hide the shame because I'm speaking it out loud, right? Also, like, just again, going back to that energetic piece, like energy is movable, right? We know that, like, energy moves. So as we're speaking, that's a vibrational thing. So as you're talking and sound is moving, you're almost moving that emotion. You're moving that energy out of you, which is healing in itself. But it's so interesting. And I get really fired up too about this because, like, again, how many women feel not enough, less than, shameful because someone else said they weren't good enough, where in reality it was the medical system that failed them, not the body that they have.
Yeah. I want to be fair that there are situations where women and babies need intervention. I'm not anti-intervention at all. I want to be clear about that. But we are overusing so much of it, and the shame often starts right there.
Yeah. I was just going to add that the shame is essentially born in that, whether it's the birthing room, whether it's in the prenatal appointments.
Yeah.
Right. I think a lot of my motherhood shame was born, the day that one of our doctors told us, quote unquote, yeah, something's wrong with your baby, because his nuclear, his NT, which is like, I can't name the
little flap in the back, right? Yeah.
Of the neck was high, right? And I really think, just reflecting and having this conversation with the both of you and just really kind of thinking about that, I really think that was the jump start of how my whole pregnancy went, because it already started off with, what did I do? Right? Did I do something? How many times moms go to a place of, it's because I didn't do X, Y, and Z enough, right? Did I do something to cause this?
Well, I think also, like, with our babies, but like also loss, we can bring in loss here as well, right? Miscarriage or some kind of chromosomal abnormality or anything, right? Like, what did we do? When in reality, I'll get a little woo-woo again, like, our womb space is a place for creation, but also for destruction. If you think about it, like, we can create and destroy as needed. So sometimes miscarriage is, I mean, it's never easy, but it's the womb's way of saying, okay, this is something isn't right here. So let me process it out before it gets to the point where it could be detected on, some kind of scan. And then sometimes it doesn't happen and it's something later on, but there's so much shame and loss and miscarriage, and we don't have any support. Well, I think it's coming out a little bit more now, where like you can get a couple like weeks of leave, but essentially after a loss, you're still in postpartum.
Absolutely.
You're still, your body, your hormones, you're still doing all of the same things, even if there's not a full baby, full live birth that happens. So I think I mean, personally, I can say I've never experienced loss, and I'm so grateful for that. But I've had very, very close friends and, you know, loved ones that have experienced it. And it's just not talked about. And like, even with my births, with my pregnancies, I announced very early for almost all of them. I think my first, I was the latest, but still, you know, before 12 weeks. And I was like, yeah, because if I have a loss, I don't want to hide it. I want people to support me, because they should support me whether I have a healthy pregnancy or whether I'm going through something tragic like that. So why not announce it and, you know, share in that? And again, if I had a loss, then I would share that as well. But so many people don't, right? And they suffer. That's another suffering in silence, or, you know, just their very close family or just their partner knows, you know, it doesn't, there's no one size fits all with that,
and it can feel so isolating.
Yeah.
Too.
Yeah.
Right. And shame really thrives in isolation. Right. That's how it feeds in isolation. And the more we can help our clients talk about this shame out loud, even if it's so uncomfortable, and you can see the visceral reaction in session. Like, I'll have moms who you can see their body language and gestures start to change. And I know, like, okay, shame's here with us. Even if she's not outwardly saying, like, I have shame, I feel a lot of shame right now, right? So they're not saying that, but you can see it in the room that it's here. Like, I feel it for them, right? And so something that we can do is, I will hold it for you so we can really kind of disentangle this and really start the healing process, because shame doesn't allow healing. It really doesn't.
I want to get into that. I want to get into like practical ways that we can start to heal and release shame. But before that, I even just want to make one point about how far back this goes, really. Like, think about a woman's first period and the experience that we feel with that. We have to hide it. It's dirty, right? Like, that is literally where the shame starts from. Anything around our anatomy, anything around our cycle, anything around birth, it has to either be hidden, it's not for others to know about, to see. Right. And like, of course, then 20 years later, 10 years later, whatever it is, you're having a baby and you're in this vulnerable place, but in your subconscious, you're like, oh, I have to be doing this by myself. I can't show it, right? Like, just tuck the tampon into your sleeve as you walk into the room. And don't let anyone know that you're a human being who bleeds. Like, it's absurd, right? I have 3 boys. For those of you listening who don't know this already, I have 3 boys and 1 girl, and I am so freaking excited for her to get her period. And my husband knows that I'm so freaking excited, because it's going to be a different experience, because I've been in this space, right? And with my boys, they've been at 2 of my home births. And they know, because I don't get any bathroom privacy. Mom of 4, no bathroom privacy. They know when mommy doesn't have a baby in her belly, or she's not feeding the baby with her boobs, then I bleed, and they see it. And they're, mommy, what's that? Like, since they were 2 years old. And I won't hide that, because I don't want them to grow up and shame other women for a natural process, right? And I think more, I'm not going to say a lot, more women are like this now, but we got a long way to go, right?
I love back like I don't know if you read The Red Tent.
Yes.
But oh my God, I think every woman needs to read that book. It was so you're just making me think of it, because in those days it wasn't hidden. It was a plan. They planned it because all of the women in the village menstruated at the same time.
Right, with the moon.
When you live together, right? I mean, we've seen it over and over in college dorm rooms, right? Everybody menstruates together. And in the villages, that's what they did. They menstruated together, and they made a plan. They would do all the food prep. They would prepare everything that the men needed to handle themselves, while the women spent 3 days in the red tent together, and or where they went to the red tent to help people in their community give birth. But talk about knowing exactly when someone's pregnant. Everybody in your village knew exactly when someone was pregnant, all the women, because you didn't show up in the red tent. Right. And like, again, that goes back to your village and your community. And like, we had that. And now my daughter, who's 15, feels like she's got to hide her little bag with her menstruation products and, you know, and put it in a cute bag so that when she's carrying it around, nobody knows what it is.
Even sometimes I find myself buying tampons and pads and like this like little inner shame, like hide it, like, you know, cover it up. And it's like,
God forbid you go to the checkout stand with that thing and not buy 10 other things just so you're not just buying only tampons.
But it's so like
how deep rooted it is.
It's so deeply rooted. And in order to like untangle all of this, we really need to also understand like where it started. Right. And it's so deep, but it's such amazing work because you can actually see the relief when a client has been able to process that shame and heal and move from that and not let it take over anymore.
Well, because sometimes it's just about recognizing it.
Absolutely.
Because, you know, it's just so normal and natural, you know, and subconscious a lot of the times that you don't even notice it's happening.
Right.
Right. Until someone goes, why do you have shame around that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What is that? So sometimes not until someone points it out. Like, I'm sure that people that are listening to this episode are having aha moments.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
They're having aha moments. They're going, oh my God, I'm never going to feel shame about that again.
Yes.
Because that starts.
Just before I forget, and our time is coming to an end, but I think we need to talk about this. So like, let's schedule another episode. But I did, because I've gone through all of this like womanhood stuff. Like after my second was born and like as I was pregnant with my daughter, she brought me into this whole like wild woman phase. So I went into all of it, right? Where I wasn't necessarily like focused on the perinatal period, but like all of womanhood from menarche to menopause and like just unpacking all of it, right? All of it. So I have something called the Shame Shifter, like a bundle course that I did. I'm going to put it in the show notes for free because if you're listening, like just go through it, right? Like just even if you can release a little bit of shame around something in your life, like that is beneficial. So the link will be in the show notes.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
But like,
oh, go ahead. I was just going to say, Gily, I know that this train left the rails like 5 minutes in. So, you know, this is what happens when you get passionate women just talking and we just kind of have a free for all.
And no, but I feel like it's hard to talk about this without acknowledging all the other stuff, right? It's all interconnected, right? So it's I think it's great. I think it's a great train to be on right now.
Great. Well, what I want to ask you is, I'm sure that you prepped for this podcast and you had all these topics that you planned to talk about, and you're just like, well, that was a waste of my afternoon. Okay, so I get that, and my apologies, but I'm sure there's something on that list that you feel like really, I want you to wrap up this podcast with one of those things that we didn't get to, but you think is just critically important that you can deliver.
Absolutely. I mean, to your point, I think we've touched on a lot of all the different points. But one thing that I really want the reader to resonate with, whether they're, you know, a mom, a provider, whoever they are, that they are in this realm of the world, is that don't judge yourself for the shame, because that's another aspect of shame, right? It makes you feel bad that you're feeling shame. Shame at the end of the day is an emotion, a really deep field emotion, but it is an emotion. So how do we treat other feelings? We acknowledge them, we validate them, right? We know that the more we acknowledge a feeling, the more it can decrease in intensity. So we want people to know, hey, listen, like, don't judge yourself for feeling shame. Let's talk about it and process it, understand where it's coming from and hold space for it. And it won't feel so intense and so heavy Another thing to keep in mind is that as providers doing this work, we can have a lot of countertransference with our clients, and we can start to realize kind of what's coming up for us too, and being able to, again, allow the space for the shame, because even that inner shame can also reinforce us not to want to go there with our client, because we're feeling the uncomfortable and the intensity of our client, and can make us shy away from asking the question, right? Or going it deeper, but allowing yourself to go deep with your client, even if they're not. I don't ever have a client call me and say, I'm ready to do some shame work with you. That's not what they're saying.
That's right.
You know, they're saying other things. And so, but when we do the work, we realize this is shame.
Yeah.
Let me give you some psycho ed about shame and what it does. And just being present. And it might take a few sessions. It's, you know, it's really following where your client is and being very aware of that body language and those gestures that tell you something's going on for them, and bringing it out.
All right. So, Gily, the last question we always ask is, speaking of the village, besides your role as an LMFT, who is the most non-negotiable, crucial part of a woman's village, in your opinion?
God, I want to get away with saying all of them, but I know I have to choose one. So I'm going to respond with what I know from my own personal experience and what I see professionally with my clients. I'm going to say a really important provider or a person for this village. I'm going to say a doula. I'm going to say a doula, because like we talked about today, it really starts from the very beginning, right? For a woman, whether finding out she's pregnant, right? And having all these anxieties of what this means, how is she going to navigate this? Having someone that she can go to with all those questions, who's going to hold that space for her and not gaslight her or make her feel like, oh, don't worry about it, right? Go figure it out. You're a woman. You're meant to figure this out. So I would say a doula. I say that too because a part of me wishes I also had that through my postpartum and pregnancy with both of my children. So it's coming from a place of, wish I had that. So I'm going to say a doula.
Yeah. Well, and I just don't want, the thing I want people to walk away from this is understanding that help is available.
Absolutely.
In so many different places, and that please, please, please don't let shame be the thing that prevents you from getting the support that you need. And knowing that everything that you experience is common, but it's not normal.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's common, but it is not normal. And the faster that you reach out, the quicker you are going to be better for yourself, for your baby, for your family. So don't hesitate. We'll have great resources in the show notes for you guys today. We want to thank you for listening. As always, please share these podcasts, because that's how more women get the help and knowledge that they need to have a better birth and postpartum experience, and help create their village and build their village. So thank you guys so much for your time today, Gily. Man, that was a fun one. I hope people got a lot of good nuggets. If you did, and you're watching this anywhere on YouTube or whatever, please comment below, because we'd love to hear what kind of aha moments you might have had. Anyways, thank you guys so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This was amazing.
Hey, thanks for joining us on Speaking of the Village.
Oh, I forgot.
If you love today's episode, make sure to hit subscribe and share it with a friend.
And remember, you're not alone. We're here, we're listening, and we're all in this together, because in our village, no mom walks alone.